So welcome everybody. I'm glad you can make it to our webinar on closing the educational gap for boys. Just briefly about me, I'm a retired secondary school science teacher. I then did a certain amount of training in evidence-based methods. I'm the author of this book which brings together evidence-based methods. That's my background in education. It's relevant. The only relevance to it is I'll explain later. I then became interested in men and boys issues and helped found this all-party group. So what is an all-party APPG, all-party group, is a voluntary group of MPs and peers who come together on a particular issue. The main advantage is that if the chair of the APPG goes to see the minister, he's more likely to get heard than if an ordinary MP goes on their own, or if a voluntary organisation does it. We've done some work on men's health strategy, and we had our first breakthrough a couple of weeks ago on International Men's Day, when the government announced about a third of what we'd asked for on men's health. So we're hoping to do something similar with education. So in March, we started an inquiry into boys' educational underachievement, which of course, you probably all know the data that at every age and stage in education, boys are doing worse than girls. It doesn't matter what their ability range or their demographic or their or anything else, they are on average doing worse. Not only here, but in the States, in Canada, everywhere you look, boys are not doing as well as girls. The first thing we did in our inquiry was to look at the data, and it is well published and published every year, so the government is fully aware of the problem. Then we started to look at the research into the reasons for this, and what we found was something very strange. That is that very little of the research went anywhere near any boys. Some of it seemed to be entirely disconnected and just be looking at graphs and data. And almost nothing had been tried out on a systematic level, that is tested, something tried in various schools and compared with other schools that hadn't tried it. The other thing that we found was that some of these researchers were putting the problem down to boys' negative stereotype of masculinity, except that one of our earlier speakers, Trevor Lloyd, who works in primary school, reckons that there's good evidence that the boys who are struggling age 15, many of them came into primary school with low language skills. We also tried contacting various members of the APPGs, asked parliamentary questions all about this problem. And the Department of Education refuses to acknowledge it as a problem. That is, we asked gendered questions like what methods has the department found to be most effective in closing the gap for boys? And the answer was, we don't deal with individual groups like that. We try to promote things which work for everybody. Now, luckily for me, I've been a teacher myself, but more importantly, I did the training sessions in schools for 7 or 8 years. And what I realized is that the real experts are in the classroom, and that the further you get away from the classroom, the more likely it is that people can believe things which are not true. So I thought it'd be worth trying to see whether anybody had actually cracked this for boys. So again, as with a marketing, I just emailed every school in the country. That's 18,000 of them, 3,000 secondaries, and landed the 4 teachers you're going to hear today. That is, the extraordinary thing is that they gave us presentations. We wrote down what they said and realized that they were roughly saying the same thing. They didn't know each other originally. So me, as a kind of evidence-based person, finds this pretty impressive. So we then cross-checked with them, put their stuff together. I'll be sharing the 2 pages summary with you after this, and found that they were quite happy to agree this cross-check list. So that seemed to us to be very helpful. The other thing is that if we look at how do you get reliable research, the research, according to EEF, the research needs to be done in a school. It needs to have a representative sample of schools and pupils. There need to be control groups for comparison. We need to use standardized tests over a meaningful time period for evaluation. And what we see here is exactly that. That is, all 4 schools you'll hear from have done it with the whole school. We can compare them with other comparable schools. They've used standardized tests, that is Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4, and they've used a meaningful period. So I would say that effectively a high quality piece of research has been carried out here. So what did they do? They're going to go through it in 4 sections. One is changing the culture of high expectations and support for everybody, building relationships, homeschool links, fixing up poor literacy, and a behavior and discipline system where everybody knows where they are and teachers feel backed up. So the purpose of this webinar is for you to hear what they've done, but more importantly, for us to hear your reactions to what they say on the matter. And then afterwards, we hope to build a network of schools who want to implement these ideas. We did contact the Chartered College of Teaching. They were very keen to run this webinar, but unfortunately, under their rules, they could only invite members of the college, and we couldn't invite extra people. And the recording would only be made available to members of the college. So that's why we decided to go ahead on our own. But we thought it might take 6 weeks to fill this webinar. But I advertised it once. I emailed every secondary school and got 75 sign-ups in the first 24 hours. So the outcome from our inquiry was published on International Men's Day. We got a little bit of publicity on Sky News and GB News. We got an article in Schools Week. Nick Fletcher did that. And so the APPG will be lobbying government on these issues, but as you will see, basically it can all be done without any help from government. And so I'm going to go over to our very first speaker, which is Dominic Burke from Balcarras School, and he's going to talk to us for a few minutes about culture and ethos, and then hopefully have time for questions. Dominic.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Balcarras's experience. We're an 11 to 18 comprehensive school on the outskirts of Cheltenham, currently 1,430 pupils in the school, 430 in the sixth form and 1,000 in the lower school. I've been a teacher at the school for 17 years, and I've been head. This is my 8th year of headship. Ever since I joined the school, we've been talking about boys' achievement, and we set out, I don't know, about 20 years ago to try to get boys to achieve as highly as girls. In about 2005, 2006, there was over a 20% gap between girls and boys. The boys were still doing well by national standards, and I've found all of the results PowerPoints from 2005, 2006. And in those days, we talked about Balcarras Boys School. How was the boys' school doing against Balcarras Girls' School? And we set out to try to close that gap and to try to eliminate it. And over time, we got closer and closer. So in the last decade, we did a lot of work, which I'll describe, and it got us by 2017-18 very, very close to closing the gap. And then in 2019, the girls' progress rate was 0.99 and the boys' progress rate was 0.71. But on 5+ English and maths, the boys got 72% and the girls got 67%. So for the first time in the history of the school, or at least probably going back to the 1970s, the boys had beaten the girls. And every year we set out, we got all the boys together since about 2010, and we said, you're going to be the first year group to beat the girls in this school. That's the challenge we set you. And we finally made it in 2019. And then in 2022, even on progress measures, the boys were ahead of the girls. 0.69 boys, 0.68 girls, 78% 5+ boys, 75% 5+ girls. So up until that point, Mike, I could have said to you, well, Balcarras has done it. We've closed the gap. But in actual fact, in 2023, there was a bit of a gap opened up again. So our girls got 86% 5+ English and maths, and our boys got 69%. But we've analysed that, and we think we understand why that happened. So just very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done over those almost 20 years. We do believe that, and this is true of everything, it's not just about boys' education, but we do believe that setting the culture and the ethos is the key to everything. Culture beats systems every day of the week. So trying to establish the right culture in the school is what we've done. And we view that work as cumulative. So we believe that we can get it better year on year, get the behaviour in the school better year on year, and get the attitude and the culture and the ethos. You build it. I often say to children, boys and girls in the school, that how they operate now will affect how the next generation, how kids are operating in this school in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. So I think there has to be that admission that what you're doing is brick by brick, isn't it? There are certain things maybe you can do to enhance things and change your culture, but I think this is work for the long term. So in terms of what we have done, we've really believed in building that culture from year 7. So I think too often we think in schools, and we've been guilty of this as well, of a sort of a remedial kind of attitude to things. You know, we get to year 11 and we think, oh, what can we do? And Balcarras does do some of that. I'll admit that. But in actual fact, your best work, I think, is done in year 7. How do the kids come into the school? What is the expectation of enjoyment? What's the culture in the school? Use year 7 as a way for boys and girls to really hook them into the school. So we talk about a lot about enjoyment, that we bring them into the school and we make that first year enjoyable. Of course, we've got to focus on behaviour and we want that to be good. But what we really want to do is we want to enthuse and engage the kids so that they buy into school. And I think there's real importance in music, in drama, and in sport and the other extracurricular activities in doing that. And I think what you want to do, and what we have tried to do year on year, is to promote positive leadership role models with boys in the school. So lots and lots of boys and girls, I mean, this crosses across, come into the school and do the right things, get involved. And what you've got to do is you've got to establish them, I think, as the leadership group of the school, right from the word go. You've got to put them front and centre. And you've got to have extracurricular opportunities that cut across the age range. And I think schools do this very well. We don't have vertical tutoring here, but I think, you know, when I see vertical tutoring, you can see that that's a good way of trying to establish really positive role models right across the school. And we do that in a number of ways via our house system. And what you don't want to do, and I know this might sound obvious, but what you don't want to do is allow the sort of the more negative role models to establish a sort of a leadership role in the school. In a way, you want that to be a fringe group, I think. How does the school's reward system hook people in, boys and girls? You know, I want to see the kids walking around my school. I want to see their engagement on their blazer, and I want them to see each other. And I think that's particularly important with boys in the school, that you establish a culture where it's cool to do well, where it's cool to be involved in music, in drama, in sport, and in everything that goes on in the school. And you've got to do that right from the start, I think. And you've got to invest in those positive role models. And again, I don't know, this might be a controversial thing to say, but I do think it's really important that there are role models right across the school, both for girls and boys. And I think your ideal model would be a sort of a staff that was sort of 50-50, really, that you had enough male role models in the school. And by the way, it'd be the same the other way around. You'd want enough female role models in the school. I do think that's important. We focused on from 2007 when I joined the school. All the talk was about effort, and we do focus on effort more than we do on attainment. In about 2010, we recognised that the boys were still behind the girls, and by some distance. And so we created something. The deputy head at the time created something called the Effort Challenge, and it was about challenging boys. And it was, I mean, I don't know, we don't do it in quite the same way nowadays, but we did just get this group of boys together and we said, look, you're not doing as well as the girls in this school, and you should do, because your ability is the same, your raw ability as you come in. And we challenged them. This was in year 11, and we challenged them. We said, look, we want your effort to be high enough, and if it is, you'll do as well as the girls. And we had the year 11 effort challenge, and it was exclusively for boys. We did something different for the girls. And it was about challenging them. So it was basically, as we went through year 11, every 2 weeks, we would do a check on effort. And it was just yes or no. Was your effort good enough or not? And we challenged the boys to challenge each other. So we put the positive role models in charge, run it as a house competition, offer some cash, hard cash, and try to create a sense of competition. And it worked. Now, maybe it was a thing of its time. We don't quite do it in the same way now. We do something similar, but we do it across boys and girls in the school, because we'd got, by the end of the last decade, we got them more or less in parity, or very, very close. The other thing we did, and we still do, and this tends to be male dominated, although not exclusively, we create a focus group in year 11 of children who get very specific attention around, and it's positive attention around their aspirations and around their performance at GCSE, how much effort they're putting in, and we just school them through it. They get somebody, it's normally the deputy head, to school them through it and to offer them advice, and to make certain that they've got everything that they need, and that there's no excuse really for them to sort of buy out. We have challenged the school, and funnily enough, I had a meeting today, and this came up. We've got somebody in looking at our departments and looking at teaching in the school, and we were talking about unconscious bias. You know, do we treat them differently, girls and boys in the school, and do we have different expectations, even in a school where we would pride ourselves that our boys are doing really well, getting really good value added? Do we have different attitudes? And we do talk to the staff about that. And I do think that does need to be challenged. And we've always set out here, and I think this, I'm sure that all schools would say this and do this. We constantly challenge ourselves to celebrate things better, you know, to make certain that nothing is overlooked. You know, if your positive role models are buying in and are doing what you want them to do, that somebody should be telling them that, and telling them that all the time, so that you, year on year, you just build up the more positive sort of attitude that you want. And the idea being that the more negative sort of view of things and view of the school will recede over time, and that you will challenge that more negative element to join into the more positive one. We've seen success in that, and I'm not saying we've got it all cracked, and we have gone backwards a little bit, as I've just said, but we set out to achieve it, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? That you set out as a school, you want to try to get them roughly achieving just as well as each other.
It's a different situation because we were an all-boys school, so the competitive element in terms of girls and boys wasn't really an issue, or wasn't something that we could utilise really. And we spent a lot of our time creating, you know, as Dominic was saying, creating a culture of achievement, but with the boys, much smaller school as well, very, very different context. The context of Wheelers was Birmingham, South Birmingham, much smaller school, 700, all boys, 11 to 16. So we spent a lot of time creating a softer culture in school, and actually addressing that kind of macho culture that a lot of the boys came in with, and treating them and trying to develop the fact that, you know, there's a whole world out there and you're part of it, and making sure that they were, you know, lots and lots of things in terms of experience that they didn't have before they came into school, conversations, relationships with children was a major part of how we approach things. You know, to build the relationship with the boys was paramount.
Thanks very much. I can see some questions coming up in the chat, so we'll just fire these at Dominic. How many pupils did you target in total?
Yeah, well, in terms of the effort challenge, that is for everybody. So we do the Year 11 effort challenge, and we still do that, and that is every kid in Year 11. So we track their effort, and we offer cash rewards, and they're drawn out at random. So we normally about 200 quid every half term, something like that, and we draw it out at random. We have changed that slightly to how it used to be. It used to be that the girls went to one part of the school and the boys went to another. Since COVID, we've not done it that way. And you know, it might be that some people think that that was a controversial idea, and maybe it was of its time, but we felt that we had a particular issue, therefore, and the only way we were going to solve it was being quite blunt with the boys, and that's where we were blunt. So the head and the deputy used to meet all the boys in Year 11, and we used to say, you are going to underachieve compared to the girls, and we don't want that to happen. So and year on year it got better with the effort challenge and the focus group. The focus group was we used to call it the 28, and that tended to be the actual focus on kids who were underachieving by some distance, and they tended to be mainly boys. I'd say like 24 boys, 4 girls, something like that. But with the effort challenge itself, it was about everybody. It was about the whole group and challenging the boys.
Okay, and another question from Leslie says, how did the girls respond to the Beat the Girls challenge?
Yeah, well, that was interesting. So when we first started it, it would have been about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. I wasn't head at the time, but the previous head got a letter from the girls, from 2 girls in Year 11, and they said, look, this is all well and good, but we'd like something for us. And so the year after, we created the Girls Challenge. Our girls have always performed in this school, in the time I've been at it, amongst the highest in the country. So this year on 5+ English and Maths, Balcarras girls came 8th in comprehensive schools in the country. So we never had a problem with girls' achievement. They were just knocking it out of the park. But they said to us, well, it's all well and good, but when we go out into the world of work, how many of us are going to be leading British companies? It's always something ridiculous, isn't it? Like there are 3 CEOs or whatever it is that are women that lead British companies. So we focused it wasn't the effort challenge. The challenge for girls was around the school, positive female role models, talking to girls about making certain that they would be ambitious, that they were going to go on and do great things. And then since the pandemic, we've united the 2 things together.
I'm going to stop you there so we keep to time. I should point out that none of the other 3 heads did this specific challenge. So that's particular to Balcarras. So I'm now going to move straight on to Andy Eadie, who's the deputy head from Cardinal Langley High School near Rochdale, and he's going to talk about building relationships and homeschool links.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name's Andy. I'm actually assistant head. You can give me a promotion if you want to, Mike, but I don't think Andy, my boss, will be very happy. So yeah, I've been here in Rochdale for 7 years now. We are another 11 to 18 school, 1,200 students, about 160 in the 6th form, so just over 1,000 in years 7 through to 11. We're in Middleton, so between Rochdale and Manchester. Middleton is a white working class area. We're on the edge of one of the poorest estates in Greater Manchester, the Langley estate. I started here 7 years ago, as I said, and my role initially was assistant head in charge of maths, to do a specific role to sort maths out. And then when that was sort of dealt with, I moved across into data and pupil premium around 4 years ago. We're about 30% PP, although probably should be higher, and very high percentage of SEN and cared for children, because we work very well with that area of our school. And as I said before, a very high percentage of white British students in the school. So that's sort of our demographic, if you like. We've got very polarized. We've got a very interesting area. We've got a lot of people in the bottom sort of 5% of postcodes, and then some kids live in sort of the top 10% of postcodes is that sort of area. We've got Leafy right next door to estates and so on. Quite a disparate area. So I looked at the gender gap. I was asked to start looking at the gender gap, having taken on Pupil Premier about in start of September 2020. It was also my MPQH project as well. So what I want to do is just give you a flavour of the observations I made, the research I did, the observations I made here as a school. About what was going on here, rather like Dominic did, and then talk a little bit about the actions specifically relating to relationships, both in school and with families, and then the impact that it had. So I did a load of reading, a load of research before diagnosing what was actually going on at Cardinal Langley here. We're a Catholic school as well. I should have said that. We're a Catholic school. Now the data told me that between 2017 and 2021, on average, boys were in attainment 8 around 5 to 10 behind, and in progress 8 about 0.5 behind on average across those years. It didn't fluctuate very much. It was about 0.5 behind in progress 8 every year. And then I did some staff surveys, some parental surveys, and some student voice. Got groups of students together, boys, girls, separately and together. Did an anonymous staff survey to get their indications of what they felt about boys and boys learning in school. And it showed there were some preconceptions, because it was anonymous. So I got some real preconceptions about boys and how low the expectations of staff were towards boys' achievement. It's quite concerning that they actually, boys will be boys type thing was coming across quite clearly from that. And then I did a really detailed analysis of our in-school rewards and sanctions over the whole school, across the whole school from year 7 right the way through to year 13. And what I discovered in that was boys were getting more rewards than girls, but also had more behaviour points. So in detail, or when I unpicked that a little bit, what it highlighted was that boys were getting rewarded in school for just not misbehaving. Fundamentally, that's what it seemed to imply, that boys are getting rewarded for not misbehaving, and a lot of girls were just going under the radar, being okay, and not getting rewarded as much as perhaps they should be. And it highlighted there was clearly a skew in what was going on from some staff and also from families as well. The parental support we had from families, particularly the white British families, was quite low. And the parental engagement was really quite low, and some turnouts at parents' evenings and so on was quite low from that cohort particularly. And also every year I do a self-esteem questionnaire for everybody in the school. They do it on their mobiles in form time, so everybody in the school I analyze their self-esteem using the Rosenberg scale, and this highlighted there were a lot of boys and girls, particularly post-pandemic, who have dangerously low self-esteem, but not just girls, quite a lot of boys as well. So there's a lot of external, internal, obviously, interventions that were put in place as a result of that questionnaire as well. So all of those observations helped me understand that a culture shift was needed within our establishment, really about expectations. What are our expectations of these young men? What do teachers expect that cohort of lads to get in their classes? And I needed to look at that in a little bit more detail. So I put some in subjects and in students and in parents as well. And what are the aspirations? What are the parental aspirations? What are the young people's aspirations for that? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things I threw in over the course of the years to impact this. So at the start of that 2020, when I was asked to bring this on to look at this, we obviously have our inset, and I did some whole staff training on highlighting these concerns, bringing sort of spotlight on that, saying, hang on a minute, look, we're rewarding and sanctioning boys, etc., etc., and put our particular focus on relationships and high expectations and aspirations for all and from all as well. And I put a particular flavour on the role of the form tutor, how important that role is to really help people engage and build positive relationships first thing in the morning, to get a temperature check, what's going on in Johnny's life, etc., how important that was. And also trauma-informed approaches, so that the people from our harder backgrounds, our more challenging backgrounds, staff were informed about that we're not a trauma-informed school by any stretch of the imagination, but people know a little bit more about that. What impact does that have? How do you de-escalate situations? How do you, when lads are getting laddie, for want of a better phrase, I hate that phrase, but I used it. How do you de-escalate these situations? And then I like little quirks and tricks. We've got these little cards that I don't know if you can see them anyhow. Little cards that go at the back of your lanyards, which we're a Catholic school, so it's got a Bible verse on it, and talking about language and how the key to positive relationships is connect. So you need to connect with all your students, respond and be calm, and then repair and restore. So talking about that's always with staff in the back of their lanyards, always with staff, and that's all over school in different sort of flavours as well. And then things like encouraging staff to welcome on the door, not just for behaviour reasons, but mainly to smile at a kid as they come in, to recognise that they're a human being. It's good to see you. It's really nice to see you. And then consistent expectations. And we also brought in a centralised detention thing, which helped with restorative practices. And part of that element, with any pastoral detention, there is a need for a restorative conversation, and that will be facilitated within that system. And obviously a quality first teaching. What I did was then I brought a group of middle leaders together, and we looked at the curriculums, ensured they weren't boy friendly, because I think that the research says do not be male, make sure that the boys are sort of, oh, let's talk about football and stuff like that. This group of middle leaders looked at that, learning walks and the fabric of classrooms, the expectations. When a student goes into a classroom, how are the posters? What's the environment like? Is it tidy? If your classroom's tidy, then kids know that the young people know that you care about them. So simple shifts in classroom behaviour from staff produce big shifts in culture. I did a load of little videos and loads of little email messages and stuff like that. We also removed FFT targets. We use them internally, but students don't know them. We created a dialogue between teachers and students about targets for their exams, so that they had an involvement in their target, and there were no ceilings. No glass ceilings were imposed there. Some interventions, picture potential, the self-esteem. I've written a course called Picture Potential, where all students with low self-esteem access that. Sixth formers married up with Key Stage 3 high ability students. So a sixth former has a responsibility to mentor a Key Stage 3. That worked really, really well with the boys particularly, and show that they could aspire to be a sixth form, aspire to go to university perhaps, and so on, things like that. And obviously the hard to reach engagement was crucial. When parents' evenings came up, we released the parents' evening appointments to a particular cohort of parents first, and then admin would phone up and make sure they booked appointments. Then it would be opened up to everybody else. So we've got our hard to reach families involved first, and a parenting course that we're developing to work with families who are really struggling. And obviously, we're a Catholic school. We do a lot in terms of social justice. So we give out Christmas hampers and things like that to engage these hard to reach families and go visit them, deliver presents to their families where they can't afford it and stuff like that. And the impact of all this was in 2022, the first time ever, boys outperformed girls. They actually got better progress rate, better attainment rate. And then there was a small gap back in 2023, but massively reduced back to 0.1, where it was 0.5 on average per years before. So, and also the pupil premium gap has been massively reduced as well. So it has had an impact, just having high aspirations, high expectations, and ensuring that people relate to one another, understand that how important these relationships are: home, school, child. And I think I'll be quiet now.
Thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. Yeah, two interesting things that I noticed from these four school leaders is, one, that they don't try and make it boy friendly, which is something that a lot of other people say you need to do. And the other thing, in an answer to one person's question, to Sam's question, none of them mentioned masculinity in the as one of the things that they addressed in their school, which I found both those things interesting.
When we start to tackle the notion of culture and relationships across a school, did either of you need to do any explicit work with staff in terms of their approaches to boys and girls, training for them? Because quite often we all carry our own lenses through which we view the world, and as adults, it's harder to unlearn some things than it is when we're younger. And whether you've done anything explicit.
Yeah, we did. And the training that I delivered to the whole staff at the start of this year, actually, to add on to what we were doing the last couple of years, it was really important that staff understand that their own upbringings, their own experiences, very much dictate how they relate to different situations. And so we've signed up to the GTT, and all staff are doing the behaviour and relationships, whatever it is, module this year. That's a really good model actually as well. But also individual conversations. Certain staff who are very good in terms of de-escalation and talking to boys or girls or whatever in a particular way, marrying them up to staff who might be struggling. And there were certain staff we had to speak to about being too laddie themselves, and therefore alienating girls potentially, or alienating a lot of the boys, and just been pally with the laddies, if you know what I mean, the football crew and so on. So we did a lot of work with individuals, and that's all about relationship with your staff, isn't it? Being able to have those. So again, it's relational. So yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be me. It'll be the member of staff who relates well to that colleague from SLT or otherwise who would have a natter. But yeah, there was whole staff training, of course, about understanding that you come in with your own baggage in that respect. You know, I was sent to boarding school, so blow my neck. What do I know? I was sent to an all-boys boarding school, so I've had to learn this on the job the last 30 years. So yeah, we did a lot of work on that, Caroline, definitely.
Yeah, could I just say, Mike, we've done some work on that as well, and trying to ensure that there's a culture of high aspirations for all children in the school is the key thing, isn't it? And one thing I've got a bit of a bugbear against is lazy setting in comprehensive schools. I think there's a real danger that your setting system allows some pupils, and it can often be boys, not exclusively, to drift down the setting system, and that the school is not doing enough to arrest that. So if a boy has come in with or a girl with a particular level of prior attainment, and they don't work hard enough, they can be difficult, blah blah blah, and so they sink down the system. Somebody should be challenging that, and that it can often be too lazy in schools, I think, and I include my own school in that. I think we're much better perhaps than we were, and I think it's something we always guard against, that if a child has come in with a certain level of prior attainment, they should be meeting that. And if they're not, then somebody should be doing something about that, rather than sort of accepting it as a fait accompli. They're boys, or they're from such and such, or whatever. The school's got a responsibility. And I think, and again, I don't want to sound like, believing in stereotypes and things like that, but I think, recognizing that some pupils, boys and girls, particularly boys sometimes, really need that structure in place for them, and that the school is in the best position or in a unique position to give that structure. And I think that's where, our focus on effort was really to say, look, if some pupils, girls and boys, are not in a position to recognize that they need to do X or Y, we're sort of going to force them to. And we took the decision that it would be in their best interest, and trying to bring the staff along with that kind of culture of, we've got to make the difference. If it ain't us, then who is it going to be?
So now we're going to move across to Diane Henson, who was, when we met her, the head teacher at Willis Lane Technology College. She's now retired, and so is going to be one of our wise advisors. And so she's going to be talking about literacy. Just before she does that, I should say, in relation to what's just been said, is that all four school leaders agreed with me when I quizzed them. I said, are you saying that the way that the boys are is the result of the way they've been treated by the adults, and that if the adults change, the boys change? And they all agreed that that was the case. That is, it's quite a different approach from the kind of something wrong with their masculinity, which we noticed in other fields. In, for instance, when we look at men's health, why don't men go to the doctor more? Is a kind of blaming men attitude. And I noticed in some of the research this sort of blaming the boys. And what I saw was missing among these four schools was they don't blame the boys. So over to Diane, who's going to talk to you about building literacy.
Hello to everybody. I did speak a little bit earlier, so you've got my context in that I was the head teacher until the summer at Wheelers Lane, 11 to 16, South Birmingham School. Similar to what Andy was saying, we were on the edge of one of the most deprived estates in Birmingham, the Billsley estate, and we have a mixed intake. So our intake ethnically is very, very mixed, but with a high percentage of white British and Pakistani boys and lots of different minority groups around that. 35% disadvantage and 28% in rising SEND needs. So typical of a lot of schools across the country. We are all boys, and it's a small school in that there's 700 boys. It's well over Pan, and it serves, as I said, quite a diverse area. So everybody, I think, worries about literacy. Notice I got the really, really riveting section of this, but I'll try and make it as entertaining as possible for you. So what we used to do was, as they came in year 7, we would obviously do the usual transition work, but we'd timetable any boys significantly below average or below national expectations. They would have weekly phonics classes and a range of interventions, including the EEF Fresh Start and different reading strategies to make sure that they caught up as soon as possible. Now, we would extend that literacy intervention right the way through to the end of year 9 if needed, or, you know, children would move in and out of it. But it was crucial that they had some formal literacy catch up outside of the curriculum. We used to have, or we still have rather, a programme of intensive staff CPD that keeps literacy as a major kind of burning issue in school. So across the school teaching and learning calendar, there is literacy across the whole of the year, the academic year, delivered by our literacy experts in schools, which are not just English teachers. They're across different subjects, and they talk about literacy in your subject area, not just about literacy as an English, you know, hopefully nobody talks like that anymore. We have whole school strategies to address literacy, as everyone else does. Form reading policy, so all of our boys read in the morning. They have a mixture of reciprocal reading, of questioning, coming up with answers, all lots of different things that the English teachers put together. They've trained staff to do it. We specifically and absolutely do not choose boy-friendly texts, and we don't on the curriculum either. You know, it's a big wide world out there. There are more than boys in the world, and we use the standard text that everybody else would use and deliberately introduce texts that might broaden their minds a little bit more or not seem to be typical. So we steer away from, you know, the standard boy-friendly things completely. We like to open up what we call a 360-degree approach to life for them. All our curriculum areas work on key vocab. They work on the tiered vocabulary model. We devise quizzes, competitions, spelling bees even, faculty by faculty, to encourage knowledge retention, understanding of academic language in specific subject areas. So it's high value stakes for the boys to be able to do these things and to get them correct. We developed a really extensive oracy policy as well. So that comes from the staff. They use a specific teaching dialogue of not talking down. They don't dumb down the curriculum. They don't make it easily verbally accessible. The policy is that they will talk to the level that they need to talk to. And then what they will do, we have planners that have red, green and amber pages on them. And if the boys don't understand something, they'll put an amber or a red page up, or they'll leave it open on their desk. The teacher will then ask another child to explain the word or explain what they mean before actually carrying on, so that any misconceptions are dealt with. If the child doesn't want to do that publicly, they'll leave it open on their desk and the teacher will go over quietly and have a word. Or we have boys in the classroom, a couple of monitors that are called knowledge keepers, who will go and support another boy in the room if they want them to do so. We then make sure as well that they get the one-to-one support they need. So every time there's an assessment or a data drop, we have a system called the Focus 5. So the teacher will identify the 5 children in their class that they have most concerns about in terms of their understanding and their literacy skills. That then is communicated with parents. There's a meeting. We identify the gaps. It's addressed in the classroom. If necessary, it's then referred on to SEND. It very rarely happens, but sometimes we might have missed something on entry or something that develops as the year goes on with the children. The speech modelling, the oracy is really important. Yes, we have debating. Yes, we have public speaking, which is great. It's lovely. But we also have a policy with staff that you talk to the boys around school. And it's not like, all right, how are you? It's, oh, good morning. You're looking great this morning. Your uniform's amazing. Or are you having a good day? And you find that they talk back to you. They mimic what you say. So you end up, with boys saying to you, how are you today, miss? You're having a good day. And you know that a member of staff has used that phrase. And at the beginning, when we first started it a few years ago, it was really kind of, it'd take you aback rather than being grunted back at by teenage boys. They were actually starting to use proper language, and staff will say, no, that's not how we speak, is it? We don't talk like that, especially if they'll say things, oh, I don't know, man. No, we don't talk like that, do we? Oh, sorry, sir. Sorry, miss. And it's that constant correcting of what we would say is, not received pronunciation, but standard speech. And, that really does make a difference. You keep at it and it makes quite a difference. It also helps with literacy because children write the way they speak. So if you then address the way they speak, it changes part of the way that they write as well. We also have... I'm well known. My senior staff probably really, really, really glad that I retired, because I have this reputation of, oh, we're going to do this. What could go wrong? It will be amazing. So we have a whole raft of intervention strategies that are unconventional, such as obviously peer reading is conventional. We have peer readers, peer mentors, a reading scheme, peer-to-peer reading, where the older boys read with the younger boys. So year 10 will read with year 7, year 8, year 9 will read with year 8 in reading groups. We have a reading dog who the children that don't like to read out loud in front of adults will happily read to. And we have things like the animal man will come in, and that will develop literacy in terms of questioning and talking. We use things like positive ponies, where our autistic boys work with the people from the farm. They bring these little bad-tempered Shetland ponies, who they learn to groom and that kind of thing. They have to ask questions, and lots of visiting authors and poets. And our biggest kind of thing that I used to absolutely love, it was my baby really, I brought it in, was World Book Day. So World Book Day is World Book Day, but we went completely out over the top on World Book Day. So everyone would dress up, staff, children, everybody. And the boys would, amazing the amount of children up to year 11 that turn up dressed as characters. Diane. Yeah, I'll be quick. Guest the teacher, guerrilla poets. So there'd be groups of boys that would learn poets with the drama department and burst into classrooms and recite a poem, to a stunned looking class. Day-long thriller narratives. So there'd be a story for a year group, and every teacher during the day would read a section of it, and they get to the end of it at form time. A whodunit crime scene every year. The scavenger hunt for books, and the analyse the quote. So they'd come to the teachers and say, well, I think it means this, and I think it means that. And it's just a day of absolute fun based around reading, literacy, and the whole package, really. We don't do anything, I suppose, that is specifically targeted at boys. And I know that's probably not what people want to hear. What we do is what everybody else does, but we do it to a school full of boys and just treat them as we would treat girls or anybody else. We don't do anything specifically boy-friendly. We just build a culture where we believe they can succeed and encourage them to do so. So the focus 5 was... the class teacher would talk to be the head of department, and one of the usually our curriculum deputy, who oversaw progress, would be there. So it would be the curriculum deputy would set the meeting up, talk to the parent, and then the teacher and the one of the pastoral support staff would be there with the parent. They'd go through. It was really an information and explanation meeting, just so that parents know what's going on with their sons. You can do all these things in school, but if parents don't know, as Andy was saying, if you haven't got those links and parents don't understand what you're doing, then they just see it as being as some sort of punishing, and it's not. It was to try and support them. They always appreciated the input, and you know, they were always really successful. You know, I've never had one yet that said, no, he's not doing that, or I don't want that to happen.
Yes, interesting. The other thing that I noticed while listening to everybody's contributions over the summer was that nothing that any of the schools did was terribly special, in as much as they didn't need extra money, they didn't need people with skills that aren't available or resources that weren't available, that everybody was doing a kind of bunch of ordinary things, which made me feel very optimistic. The other thing that I found optimistic was because I'm a bit of a evidence buff. Every time I listen to people saying what they've done, I'm thinking, yeah, well, if you were to read the evidence, which most people haven't, you'd be doing stuff like that. So being evidence-based is another tick for this, I think. One of the interesting things was that I think I mentioned at the beginning that one of our first speakers, this guy Trevor Lloyd, who works in primary schools in London, says that if you take your average underachieving 15-year-old boy and track him back, you'll find he came to primary school with lower language skills than the average. He said, it's not that it's a boy thing, it's that if you look in that bottom group of low language kids coming into primary school, 80% of them are boys. But the other thing he said was that even a 6-week intervention at that age makes a significant difference. So a literacy intervention. And I think also you said at another time, Diane, that you actually take some of these boys out of, say, French or history, I can't remember which, because literacy is such a priority.
We don't take them out. What we do is we do a 6-week, we take them out of one lesson and then put them back in. So we don't take them out. And, you know, for anyone who's online will know that you can't take them out anymore. You can't disapply them from any subject under the current Ofsted framework, but you can take them out for a period of time and then make sure that they catch up with what they've missed. Yes, we do that. And we do also make sure that where there is real difficulty, the SEND department, for example, would teach literacy through geography separately so that they don't fall behind in their curriculum, but they are particularly focused on some of the literacy areas that they're struggling with.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for the clarification. So now we go on to our fourth speaker, who's Caroline Barlow. She's from Heathfield Community College in East Sussex, and she's going to be talking about behaviour and discipline.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm not enormously a great fan of the word discipline for all the connotations that goes with it. So I'm probably more going to talk about behaviour and relationships, which speaks to the inputs that we've had from everybody else already around culture and ethos. So there will be some repetition, but hopefully it will lead to a point that is vaguely useful for people. Just for context then, we are a different type of school again. We're an 11 to 18 rural comprehensive. We're maintained and we are literally in the middle of nowhere. According to DFE descriptions, we are not even rural, we're an isolated dwelling, which reflects the fact that we are literally surrounded by fields. So our demographic on the face of it looks reasonably lovely and leafy, but contains pockets of agricultural poverty. We have reasonably standard levels of pupil premium and low levels of SEND, but we also have a facility for ASD attached to us. So we have deep levels of expertise in a whole range of areas. This is my 9th year of headship, and when I started, much like others have described, we had, if we go by the 9 to 4 measure, which would then have been called something completely different and with letters, we had a 25% gap between our boys and our girls, not in the boys' favour, back in 2015. And I won't bore you with too many stats, but last year at 9 to 4, that was reduced to 5%, and at 9 to 5, it was pretty much bang on equal. So whatever we have done does seem to have made significant difference, and it's made a difference throughout all of those years. I echo what Dominic was saying about a little and often and building on the bricks of what you've done before. I completely agree with the idea of a research-informed approach. And one of the things that we did that set the context of a lot of this work was we have what we call innovation teams, where we have groups of staff who are keen to explore research on a particular topic, are given some time and a very small nominal budget to explore the research and trial different things. So where you're talking, Mike, about, you know, the research suggests do this or do that, or have this gimmick, or trial this silver bullet that will work the trick with boys, they explored a whole range of them. They explored things like, oh, let's take them to aspirational enrichment opportunities. We explored developing parental links. We explored even doing I think there was a group doing a plank on a regular basis, because there was some suggestion that physical exertion might have an element of impact. And then we had mentoring and coaching groups running, and they looked at all of those to explore which ones actually made a difference and which ones didn't. And when we got to the heart of it, we worked out there were 5 strategies that actually made a significant difference. And one around behaviour, yes, absolutely, is about fairness and tone, which speaks to a lot of what Andy was talking about and a lot of what others have talked about, avoiding stereotypes. And I'm going to keep coming back to this notion of fairness and equality. Completely echo what Diane was saying, because one of the key things that came through was around oracy and deep questioning for understanding. So you're back to really high quality teaching and learning. We also looked at display and environment, and it's really interesting to walk the school and actually count how many boys, how many girls are in your posters, how many boys, how many girls are in your newsletters, in your prospectus, because we're used to looking at it from a different diversity perspective. And of those boys, how many of them are in stereotypical roles? So how many of our boys are actually just doing the things that we want them to be doing, and how many of them are doing the stereotypical things? I'll talk in a minute about the use of data, because we measure and count a lot of things, but particularly we noticed it was worth looking at engagement in lesson, but also engagement out of lesson. Again, with a focus on building relationships. We look at how many are in clubs, how many are in leadership roles, what is the average praise count per boy and girl, what is the average consequence count per boy, per girl. And again, when we look at it by department, what are the pictures you've got up on the walls? So all of our display is intended to root back to our core values and show the students doing the things we want them to be doing. We have 5 what we call Heathfield habits, and we make sure that all of the visuals on the walls speak to them being engaged, enthusiastic, ambitious, confident, all of those things. We label them up where we feel we need to, and we make sure that there are boys and girls doing all of those things in as much equal measure as we can. And then, yeah, absolutely underpinning all of it is that clarity of high expectations. But I asked the question about what work do you have to do with staff, because a lot of this then meant that we needed to do work with staff to clarify a lot of these things. One of the things that the innovation team did was hold up a mirror. They went into classrooms, they picked a department, and they literally recorded how many times and in what ways did staff talk to boys versus talk to girls. What was the response given when a boy asked a question versus when a girl asked a question? And it was hard factual data that really showed, even for the people who felt that they were really open and unbiased and completely equitable in their approach, actually they weren't as equitable as they thought they were. So it made them really think about, and again, high quality teaching and learning, planning their questioning, thinking about the responses to questioning. Because a lot of the boys were saying, actually, we get told off for doing really simple things because we're louder and we're noisier, or we have more exaggerated gestures. Whereas actually the girls are doing 10 times more things, but nobody ever notices because they smile and they float around and nobody really sees what's going on. Now, girls will talk in different ways about what boys do that don't get noticed or that get laughed along with. So this notion of fairness and equality and holding people to account for what our high expectations are was a really important part of it. And for that reason, we analyse the behaviour data on a fortnightly basis in curriculum areas. So they are able to unpick per class where a praise is being given, where a consequence is being escalated. Have we got students that are sitting on just being given a warning class after class after class, or is it being escalated appropriately? And is that the same for everybody? We do sit on almost exactly the same number of praises being given per girl as per boy, and almost exactly the same level of consequences. But it's taken us a while to get to that point because we had to really drill into the data to get there. That then had to lead to a certainty of consequence and an absolute consistency of consequence. And again, that takes data analysts across a year group and at a school level to make sure that we are tracking students are not getting stuck in a cycle of consequences, that they are being escalated, that the right support is being put in place, that we're involving parents. There's a whole different chapter I could talk about on parental engagement, but that's an important part of it as well. I completely agree with the work on role models and leadership. That's a really strong element of what we do, and where we didn't have boys putting themselves forward for that, we encourage them, we put them forward, because again, then they become the positive role models that you can point to. Talking to staff about, regardless of what's happened the lesson before, you're on the door, you're smiling, you're being as positive as possible, you're welcoming them into the environment, you have the ability to not hold a grudge. Lesson to lesson was an important training point that we recognize with staff. So fairness and equality right at the heart of it, underpinning high expectations, but actually you can say all of that unless you track it, check it, and act on it. Actually, it just becomes rhetoric. So it is the going back to staff, challenging them when they weren't following through on that, supporting them to be able to follow through on things, and using the data to tell the story, which allows us to celebrate the successes and talk a lot about the equivalencies and the equality, which means that actually the feedback is students think this is a really inclusive and positive place to be. But yeah, it's taken us a long time to get there.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, one of the things that struck me listening to your four heads is I wish I'd been teaching in your school, because I didn't feel backed up when I was teaching. I didn't feel backed up the way you appear to be backing. And it's really good message you got there about fairness. I think it backs up what other people have said about not trying to make it boy friendly. And also that what you can demonstrate is that even when people don't notice, adults are treating boys and girls differently, and that when you start to treat them fairly, you do get the same results. That's the extraordinary thing.
You do. I suppose I'd come back on that slightly. I don't think that we can pretend that societal factors don't exist. And I think that there is a high degree of challenge from within society that we have had to respond to. But we do that quietly. So we hold workshops for the boys that we know are at risk of or are demonstrating misogyny, who are more likely to bring those negative behaviours into school, or that we know who already have, and they do need our support to be educated, to think more broadly, to see things differently. But we don't necessarily conduct the whole year assembly that says you're all a bunch of misogynists. What we actually do is work with them individually. So it's not that we're pretending that that doesn't exist. We very clearly know it does. And the feedback from our girls is that it does, but actually that it needs a different approach. And we very actively go out of our way to do that. We talked about support for staff. I mean, I didn't talk about, but I would imagine most schools on this call will have a centralised approach to detentions, ways of reducing workload for staff that mean that they are able to focus on the solutions, not the administration of all of that. But I can happily answer questions about that if people want to.
Okay, there is a question in the chat which I don't understand. Somebody called Oswell said the evidence given. Is that person able to clarify, or do you understand the question, Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, they're not wrong. I mean, a lot of what we're quoting, I suppose, is the ballpark performance measures. I suppose the value in that is that they are comparable school against school. They're not wrong that that's pretty standard as a measure. In terms of other evidence, I suppose I've tried to talk about looking at things from our praise and consequence and engagement data. And then also, yes, focus groups and support groups. We did a lot of that at the start. Why did boys think there was underachievement? Why did girls think there was underachievement? And regular student feedback that we use. So there is a wealth of other data that I've collected. And if I've not drilled on that enough, then I'm sorry, please do ask me more specifically. But I did try to give examples of that along the way.